Hello, everybody. So, got some news. Let's see what it's about. Oh, new study. Study shows how brain cells, what is that? How brain cells of males and females respond differently to stress. Makes sense. Uh, we have to, we have different roles, so we have to respond differently to different stimuli. A new study from Professor Alon, Alon Alon Chen's joint laboratory at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot and the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich, Germany, shows how the brains of males and females respond differently to stress. Researchers hope that the findings will eventually lead to sex-tailored therapies for stress. Well, that makes sense, but there's going to be some overlap eventually, but that's going to be like in a minority. But yeah, sex tailored therapies for stress related psychiatry, stress related psychiatry, psychiatric disorders such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and also some stress-related disorders such as diabetes. Diabetes can be stress-related? I have no idea. Historically, scientists have only studied men based on gender assigned at birth. Interesting wording. Since the 1980s, researchers have been required to include women in clinical trials. I can understand why they've only studied men, because of the nature of the studies. It might be more complicated to study women, full body sort of study. Women might not be so comfortable with that, and they'll have to get different examiners just for that. And it might be a little bit more expensive to study women and men. So I understand why it was only men in the beginning. It's so much easier to be like, men sign up for the study. You don't have to worry about a lot of sort of legal issues that might come about because of that. Since the 1980s, researchers have been required to include women in clinical trials, but it is only now that there is a movement starting with the NIH, National Institute of Health, saying that both males and females must be studied on the cellular and molecular level in basic research. Dr. Ellen Brevio said. You'd think that would be obvious. Like you need to study both in order to get an accurate study of, because like we both make up the human race. Like if you're going to study humans, you need both genders. It's just like, it's just a weird thing that they didn't, Brevio, originally from Italy, led the study published this month in the peer-reviewed Cell Reports as the main part of the doctoral studies in Chen's lab. She now has a postdoc position. I don't need to know her credentials. I'm sure she's qualified. Speaking with the Times of Israel, Brevio emphasized that the study was done on mice and therefore dealt with sex differences and not gender differences. Sex differences, but not gender differences. Okay. I guess there's very little gender differences between in mice as far where there's more in humans, I guess. Gender is a human construct and applies only to humans. Yeah, because humans have a bigger difference in our gender. I mean, you could go with insects and there's a huge difference in the gender then, like the queens are freaking massive. But even then, it's like, you know what I mean? Like it seems like a human construct because there's a major difference in human uh sex. Like males are bigger, bone density, like there's a huge difference in the way our bodies are structured. But we used mice because mice brains are a very good model for human brains. Yeah, so you were just studying the brains then. They even exhibit depression-like behavior similar to what we see in humans. Yeah, but you don't get the gender differences in female and male brains as you do in humans as you do with mice. For years, clinical studies and observation have demonstrated differences between men and women in terms of their responses to stress. Stress presents differently in men and women in terms of prevalence and symptoms. For example, 2/3 of depression diagnoses are in women. Yeah, they're a little bit more emotional, so that makes sense. The men could be equally as depressed, but they cover it up more. Whereas the women, when they're depressed, they express it more. So it's a little bit more obvious. And while men diagnosed with depression tend to show more anger, women exhibit more anhedonia or social withdrawal, loss of motivation, and lack of enjoyment. Yeah. Also makes sense. As protectors, anger is, it's like fight or flight. Like you need anger to drive you to fight rather than flight. We also know that some drugs for stress-related pathologies work better in males and some work better in females, but we don't know why. Because the brains are different and respond to different stimuli. Just a guess. This is partially because we don't know much about the disorders themselves, but it's also partially because nobody has bothered to study female biology. Nobody. I thought it was just this specific thing, but I guess no one's bothered. They just never had the time. She and her colleagues used the powerful research tool of RNA sequencing, the powerful tool of RNA sequencing, which looks at gene expression and regulation. They applied the tool to the cells of the tissue of the paraventricular nucleus, PVN, of the hypothalamus in the mice, which is the part of the brain in all mammals that coordinates the stress response. There were 3 particular questions the team sought to answer: how each cell type in that part of the brain responds to stress, how each cell type previously exposed to chronic stress responds to a new stress experience, and how these responses differ between males and females. Okay, what are the results? Before looking at the mouse brain cells, the researchers exposed the mice to, I thought they did this in humans. They're still talking about the mice, to short-term and long-term combinations of mild psychological. Yeah, let's skip this. Let's get to the human part. When later applying sequences to mouse, blah, they discovered that the different types of cells respond to stress in different ways, and the way that there were sex differences. This is still mice. What about humans? We found some cells that respond. There's similar brains in mice, and I guess, but it doesn't apply equally, though. A small variable could be a huge difference when you're talking about brains. So we got to do the human research. We found some cells that respond to stress in the females, but not the males, and the other way around. And then when we look at these cells and the responses after chronic stress, we found some cells that were particularly sensitive. The response was different from after normal stress. Also here, there were differences between males and females. The researchers then focused on the oligodendrocyte, a subtype of glial cell that provides support to neurons. I don't need to know all this. Are characterized by a very complex structure of a lot of branches. The ones in the male mice after stress exposure were similar looking, and they were characterized by a more immature expression of genes. This was not true for the angliodendrocytes in the female brains, which retained their complex structure. Which means, after reading this, I now realize why they don't test this on humans. You can't be doing that to humans. Yeah. As part of the study and in keeping with the principles of open access science, the researchers decided to make the entire detailed mapping of their work on the mice brains publicly available. The findings on may also use researchers of myelin-related disorder, such as multiple sclerosis, as these cells primarily function. Okay. We are showing that oligodendrocytes are indeed important cell types for stress. They are possibly important for good brain function. Possibly. I mean, they're in the brain. but this is not true in both sexes, and we need to keep this in mind for future studies. I agree with you. We need to study both, but like the nature of this research, I don't think it would be allowed in humans. If you need the person to be alive to be testing their brain like that, in addition to investigating in the future whether the findings in mice are the same as in humans, Brevio emphasized that the value of the sex differences she and her colleagues found is not yet clear. And the differences could be positive or they could be negative. Yeah, you basically don't know. That's what you're saying. I mean, I support you, but I don't know how many humans you're gonna get to volunteer for you to be poking around their brains like that, especially women. So good luck to you. Till next time.